The spaceship descended slowly, its engines roaring as it pierced the thick atmosphere of the alien planet. Dust swirled around the landing site, creating a haze that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Captain Alan Carter stood at the helm, his hands gripping the controls tightly. He was a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, but today worry lines creased his forehead. This mission wasn't just about exploration, it was about survival. Earth's resources were dwindling, and humanity needed a new home. Behind him, Dr. Laura Hayes watched silently. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her calm demeanor masked the unease she felt. She had spent months studying this planet from afar, analyzing data sent by probes. It seemed habitable. Breathable air, fertile soil, and plenty of water. But there was one thing no probe could fully prepare them for: the native species known as the Vokhtar. As the dust settled, the crew stepped out onto the alien surface. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, streaked with clouds that shimmered like liquid silver. Strange plants swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves glowing faintly. It was beautiful, but also unsettling. Every sound, every movement, reminded them they weren't alone. A group of Vokhtar appeared on the horizon, moving swiftly toward the humans. They were tall, their bodies covered in sleek, chitinous armor that reflected the light. Their faces were insect-like, with large, multifaceted eyes that scanned the newcomers curiously. At their center stood Warlord Kale, easily distinguishable by his ornate chestplate and the jagged scars running down his arms. His presence commanded respect and fear. Captain Carter stepped forward, raising an open hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he said through a translator device clipped to his belt. The words came out haltingly, distorted by the machine, but the message seemed clear enough. Kale tilted his head, studying the humans with an unreadable expression. Then, without warning, he raised a clawed hand and pointed directly at Carter. A low rumble filled the air as several Vokhtar warriors stepped closer, weapons drawn. Tension crackled between the two groups like static electricity. Dr. Hayes moved quickly, stepping beside Carter. "We're here to learn," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "To share, not to take." For a moment, it seemed Kale might order an attack. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of the human crew. But then, unexpectedly, he lowered his arm. The warriors followed suit, though their weapons remained ready. Kale turned and gestured for the humans to follow him. Carter glanced at Hayes, who gave a slight nod. They didn't have much choice. Slowly, cautiously, the crew began to walk behind the Vokhtar leader, leaving the safety of their ship behind. As they moved deeper into the alien terrain, strange structures loomed into view. Towering spires made of some kind of organic material, pulsating faintly with inner light. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Sarah Bennett, the team's linguist, stayed close to Carter, clutching her notebook tightly. She whispered to herself, trying to memorize every detail. For all its beauty, this world felt wrong somehow, as if it were watching them, waiting. And perhaps it was. Over the next few weeks, life on the alien planet became a delicate balancing act. The humans worked tirelessly to establish their colony, building shelters and setting up equipment under the watchful eyes of the Vokhtar. Warlord Kale had allowed them to stay but made it clear that they were guests, not equals. His warriors patrolled the perimeter of the settlement, their movements silent yet intimidating. The message was obvious. Step out of line, and there would be consequences. Sarah Bennett spent most of her time observing the Vokhtar, jotting notes in her worn notebook. She had begun to pick up patterns in their language, a series of clicks, hums, and subtle body movements. It wasn't easy. The Vokhtar communicated more with gestures than words, and their expressions were hard to read. But one day, while watching a group of them interact near the glowing spires, she noticed something unusual. One of the younger Vokhtar seemed different from the others. He didn't carry himself with the same rigid pride as the warriors, and his eyes held a flicker of curiosity rather than hostility. This Vokhtar introduced himself, or so Sarah assumed, as Jorvac. Through broken translations and careful observation, she learned that he was not a warrior, but a scholar, tasked with studying the humans just as she studied them. At first, their interactions were cautious, limited to simple exchanges about food, tools, and weather. But over time, a fragile bond formed between them. Jorvac confided in Sarah that many of his kind were uneasy about the humans' presence. Some saw them as invaders who would disrupt the natural order, while others feared they might bring change that could weaken the Vokhtar's iron grip on the planet. Meanwhile, tensions simmered within the human camp. Captain Alan Carter struggled to keep morale high. Supplies were running low, and the colonists were exhausted from working long hours in unfamiliar conditions. Matthew Dawson, a farmer with calloused hands and a gruff demeanor, voiced his frustrations during meetings. "We're sitting ducks here," he said one evening, his voice rising above the murmurs of agreement. "If those bugs decide to turn on us, we won't stand a chance." Dr. Laura Hayes tried to calm him down. "We need to focus on building trust," she said firmly. "Attacking them or acting aggressively will only make things worse." Her words did little to ease the growing unease among the settlers. Many felt vulnerable, surrounded by an alien species they barely understood. Despite the tension, small moments of cooperation began to emerge. When a human child wandered too close to a dangerous patch of bioluminescent plants, a Vokhtar scout intervened, guiding the child back to safety. In return, Dr. Hayes treated a wounded Vokhtar warrior whose armor had been damaged in a hunting accident. These acts of kindness were rare but significant, offering a glimmer of hope for peaceful coexistence. But beneath the surface, darker forces were at work. Rumors spread among the settlers about the Vokhtar's advanced weapons, devices capable of unleashing devastating biological attacks. Some claimed to have seen strange experiments conducted inside the pulsating spires, where creatures were altered and twisted into monstrous forms. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated, they fueled fear and mistrust. One evening, as Sarah sat with Jorvac near the edge of the settlement, she asked him directly about the rumors. "Are you trying to scare us away?" she said, her tone gentle but probing. Jorvac hesitated before responding. "Not all of us want war," he finally admitted. "But my people have ruled this land for centuries. Fear keeps order. Without it, chaos follows." His words lingered in Sarah's mind long after their conversation ended. She couldn't shake the feeling that the fragile peace they had built was teetering on the edge of collapse, and that one wrong move could send everything crashing down. The fragile peace between the humans and the Vokhtar shattered one fateful night. The air was thick with humidity, and the purple sky was streaked with flashes of lightning in the distance. Most of the settlers had retired to their makeshift shelters, exhausted from another long day of work. But Matthew Dawson couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at a small wooden carving of his daughter, Emily. She was only 6 years old, with bright eyes and an infectious laugh that could light up even the darkest moments. Emily was asleep in the next room when the attack came. A group of rogue Vokhtar warriors, clad in darkened armor to blend with the shadows, slipped past the perimeter undetected. They moved silently, their clawed feet making barely a sound against the soft alien ground. These were not Kel's elite soldiers, but younger, more impulsive fighters who resented the humans' presence. To them, the settlers were invaders who threatened the Vokhtar way of life. And tonight, they intended to send a message. Matthew heard the commotion first, a sharp cry followed by the sound of breaking glass. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and rushed toward Emily's room. By the time he got there, it was too late. 2 Vokhtars stood over her, their jagged weapons glinting in the dim light. One of them grabbed Emily roughly, lifting her off the ground as she screamed for her father. Matthew lunged at them, shouting and swinging his fists wildly, but a third warrior struck him from behind, knocking him to the floor. "Stop!" Sarah Bennett's voice cut through the chaos. She had been walking back from the research tents when she heard the noise and ran toward it without thinking. Her translator device buzzed as she tried to reason with the attackers. Let her go. She's just a child. But the Voktar didn't listen. With a swift, brutal motion, one of them raised his weapon and struck Emily down. Her small body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Time seemed to freeze. Matthew screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the settlement. Sarah stumbled backward, her hands covering her mouth in horror. The warriors melted back into the darkness as quickly as they had come, leaving devastation in their wake. Within minutes, the entire colony was awake, drawn by the cries of grief and anger. Captain Alan Carter arrived to find Matthew cradling Emily's body, tears streaming down his face. The sight sent a chill through everyone who saw it. Even Dr. Laura Hayes, usually so composed, looked shaken as she knelt beside Matthew, trying to offer comfort he couldn't accept. Word of the attack spread rapidly, igniting outrage among the settlers. How could the Voktar do this? Why would they target a child? Calls for justice or vengeance grew louder. Some demanded immediate retaliation, while others urged caution, fearing what might happen if tensions escalated further. Jorvac learned of the incident the next morning. When Sarah told him, her voice trembling with emotion, he looked stricken. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "Even among my people, harming a child is unthinkable." He promised to speak to Warlord Kale, to demand answers and accountability. But when Jorvac approached Kale later that day, the warlord dismissed him coldly. "The humans must learn respect," Kale growled. "If they cannot understand strength, then fear will teach them." Those words haunted Jorvac as he returned to the human settlement. He found Sarah sitting alone, staring blankly at the ground. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Kale won't punish them. He doesn't care." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "Then maybe we should," she whispered. The days that followed Emily Dawson's death were heavy with grief and anger. Matthew Dawson became a shadow of himself, his once strong frame now hunched under the weight of despair. He rarely spoke, spending most of his time sitting by Emily's grave, which had been marked with a simple wooden cross. The other settlers gave him space, unsure of how to comfort him, or if they even could. Captain Alan Carter called an emergency meeting in the center of the settlement. Dozens of colonists gathered, their faces pale and drawn, some still wearing the dirt and sweat from a day's labor. The mood was tense, almost electric, as people waited for Carter to speak. When he finally did, his voice was low but firm. "We can't let this stand," he said. "If we do nothing, they'll think we're weak. They'll think they can hurt us without consequence." Dr. Laura Hayes stepped forward, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "Retaliation will only make things worse," she argued. "Kale already sees us as a threat. If we attack, it'll give him an excuse to wipe us out completely." Her words sparked heated debate. Some settlers agreed with her, urging patience and diplomacy. Others, like Jason Miller, a former soldier turned farmer, sided with Carter. "Diplomacy won't bring Emily back," Jason snapped, "and it won't stop them from doing this again. We need to show them we're not afraid to fight." Matthew didn't say a word during the argument. He sat on the edge of the crowd, his jaw clenched tightly. When the shouting died down, he stood up slowly, drawing everyone's attention. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm going after them," he said. "If none of you have the guts, I'll do it myself." His declaration sent shockwaves through the group. Several people tried to talk him out of it, warning him that acting alone would get him killed. But Matthew wasn't listening. That night, he gathered supplies, a knife, a coil of rope, and a small container of fuel, and slipped away into the darkness. He didn't go far before others joined him. A handful of settlers, including Jason Miller, followed quietly, unwilling to let Matthew face the Voktar alone. Together, they made their way toward a nearby Voktar outpost, a cluster of glowing spires surrounded by thick vegetation. It wasn't Kel's main stronghold, but it was close enough to send a message. Under the cover of night, the group set their plan into motion. Using the fuel, they created makeshift torches and set fire to the edges of the outpost. Flames licked at the organic structures, causing them to writhe and groan as if alive. Alarms blared, and Vokhtar warriors poured out of the spires, their weapons ready. Matthew and his companions retreated quickly, disappearing into the forest before the Vokhtar could catch them. Back at the settlement, news of the sabotage spread quickly. While some cheered the act as a necessary strike, others worried about the fallout. Sarah Bennett confronted Captain Carter, her expression tight with anxiety. "This is exactly what Kel wants," she said. "Now he'll see us as aggressors. He'll use this as an excuse to destroy us." Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "Maybe. But we can't sit around waiting for him to make the first move. We need to show strength, or we're finished." Jorvac arrived later that evening, his movements hurried and frantic. He pulled Sarah aside, speaking in hushed tones. "You don't understand what you've done," he warned. "Kale is furious. He's planning something big, something that could end all of you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What can we do?" she asked. Jorvac hesitated, then met her gaze. "Leave. Take your people and go while you still can." But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. The colony had invested too much to leave now, and many settlers wouldn't abandon their new home without a fight. As she watched the flickering lights of the distant fires, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fragile peace they had once hoped for was gone forever, and that something far worse was on the horizon. Sarah spent the next few days poring over ancient Vokhtar texts, her mind racing with Jorvac's warning. The sabotage had only deepened the rift between the humans and the Vokhtar, and Kale was preparing to strike back. Sarah knew they needed answers, and fast. She hoped the old writings might hold some clue, some way to avoid an all-out war. The texts were difficult to decipher. Written in a language that seemed more symbolic than literal, they spoke of legends and prophecies passed down through generations. One story caught her attention, the tale of the eternal flame. According to the legend, long ago, a group of Vokhtar warriors committed a grave sin by harming an innocent child during a time of peace. As punishment, a mysterious force known as the eternal flame descended upon them, consuming their homes and leaving nothing but ash in its wake. The prophecy claimed that any who repeated such an act would suffer the same fate. At first, Sarah dismissed it as superstition. The Vokhtar were advanced, relying on science and technology rather than myths. But something about the story lingered in her mind. Could it be more than just a fable? She decided to share it with Jorvac, hoping he might shed light on its significance. When she found him near the edge of the settlement, Jorvac was crouched over a glowing plant, examining its pulsating veins. He looked up as she approached, his large eyes reflecting the dim light. "What is it?" he asked, sensing her urgency. "I think I found something," Sarah said, holding out the translated notes. "A prophecy about harming children. It talks about punishment." Jorvac's expression darkened as he read the text. "This is serious," he murmured. "Many of my people believe in the eternal flame. They see it as a sacred law, a boundary even Kel wouldn't dare cross." "Do you believe it?" Sarah pressed. Jorvac hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but if others believe it, it could change everything. If word spreads that Kel allowed this sin to go unpunished." Before he could finish, a sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. Both Sarah and Jorvac stumbled, grabbing onto nearby plants for support. The tremor lasted only a few seconds, but it left an eerie silence in its wake. In the distance, strange lights flickered across the horizon, unnatural bursts of red and orange that danced like fireflies. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her heart racing. Jorvac didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the lights, his mandibles twitching nervously. "It's starting," he said finally. "The signs are here." Back at the settlement, the settlers noticed the changes too. Winds picked up unexpectedly, carrying with them whispers that no one could quite understand. Some claimed to hear voices calling their names. Others reported seeing shadowy figures moving in the corners of their vision. Even Captain Carter, who prided himself on staying level-headed, admitted to feeling uneasy. Laura Hayes tried to rationalize the phenomena. "It's probably just the planet reacting to stress," she suggested during a meeting. "Maybe seismic activity or weather patterns we don't understand yet." But not everyone was convinced. Matthew Dawson sat quietly in the corner, his face pale. He had seen Emily's death replay in his dreams every night since the attack. Now, with these strange occurrences, he couldn't help but wonder if her spirit, or something else, was trying to tell him something. Jason Miller voiced what many were thinking. What if it's not natural? What if it's payback? The room fell silent. No one wanted to entertain the idea of supernatural retribution, but the thought hung in the air like smoke. Sarah stood up, clutching her notes tightly. "We need to warn Kel," she said. "If he believes in this prophecy, maybe it'll stop him from attacking us." Captain Carter frowned. "And if he doesn't care?" "Then we prepare for the worst," Sarah replied grimly. "Because if this really is the eternal flame, none of us will be safe." Kel's attack came without warning. It began just after sunrise, when the settlers were still waking and preparing for the day. The first sign of trouble was a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the ground trembled violently, knocking people off their feet. Before anyone could react, the skies darkened as swarms of Vokhtars descended upon the settlement, their weapons glowing with an ominous energy. The assault was brutal and chaotic. Vokhtar warriors moved with terrifying speed, smashing through makeshift barriers and setting fire to tents and equipment. Screams filled the air as settlers scrambled for cover. Captain Alan Carter shouted orders, trying to rally his people into some semblance of defense, but it was clear they were outmatched. The Vokhtars' weapons were devastating, biological projectiles that dissolved whatever they touched, leaving behind smoldering craters. Amid the chaos, Dr. Laura Hayes worked frantically to treat the wounded. She had set up a triage area inside one of the sturdier shelters, her hands moving quickly as she bandaged burns and stopped bleeding. Her calm demeanor steadied those around her, even as explosions rocked the walls. "Keep moving," she urged a group of settlers carrying an injured man. "We can't stop now." Matthew Dawson fought alongside Jason Miller, wielding a crude spear fashioned from a broken tool. His grief had turned into raw fury, driving him forward despite the odds. Together, they managed to hold off a small group of Vokhtars long enough for several families to escape into the forest. But the cost was high. Jason took a glancing blow to his shoulder, leaving him clutching the wound as blood seeped between his fingers. Sarah Bennett ran through the mayhem, searching for Jorvac. She had hoped he might intervene, convincing Kale to call off the attack, but there was no sign of him. Instead, she found herself face to face with a Vokhtars warrior. Its multifaceted eyes gleamed menacingly as it raised its weapon. Just as Sarah braced for the worst, a burst of light erupted nearby, blinding the creature. A second later, Matthew appeared, swinging his spear with all his strength. The warrior staggered back, giving Sarah enough time to flee. As the battle raged on, strange phenomena continued to unfold. The unnatural fires Sarah and Jorvac had seen earlier spread across the landscape, consuming everything in their path. Trees twisted and blackened as if alive, while eerie whispers echoed through the air. Some settlers whispered prayers, convinced they were witnessing divine wrath. Others simply ran, desperate to survive. In the midst of the destruction, Jorvac finally arrived. He moved cautiously, dodging both human defenders and Vokhtars attackers alike. When he reached Sarah, his expression was grim. "It's too late," he said urgently. "Kel won't listen. He thinks this is proof of your weakness." "What about the prophecy?" Sarah demanded. "Doesn't he see what's happening?" Jorvac shook his head. "He refuses to believe. To him, these are tricks. illusions meant to frighten us. A sudden explosion forced them to take cover behind a fallen tree. As they caught their breath, Sarah made a decision. "Then we have to get to him ourselves," she said firmly. "If we can show Cal the truth, maybe we can stop this." Jorvac hesitated, then nodded. "There's a way into his stronghold, a hidden passage I know. But it's dangerous. Are you sure?" "I don't have a choice," Sarah replied. They set off together, weaving through the battlefield. Along the way, they encountered Jason, who insisted on joining them despite his injury. "I'm not sitting this out," he growled. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, knowing they would need all the help they could get. Reaching the hidden passage required navigating treacherous terrain, including jagged cliffs and rivers of molten-like liquid. Each step felt like a gamble, but the trio pressed on, driven by hope and fear. Behind them, the sounds of war grew fainter, replaced by the haunting crackle of flames and the howling wind. When they finally reached the entrance to Kel's stronghold, Jorvac turned to the others. "This is it," he said quietly. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Sarah tightened her grip on the translator device slung over her shoulder. "Let's end this," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The hidden passage into Kel's stronghold was dark and narrow, its walls slick with a strange, glowing substance that pulsed faintly as they moved. Sarah led the way, her footsteps cautious but determined. Jason followed close behind, clutching his injured shoulder, while Jorvac brought up the rear, his sharp eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The air grew heavier the deeper they went, filled with an acrid smell that made it hard to breathe. "Are you sure this is the right path?" Jason whispered, his voice barely audible over the eerie hum echoing through the tunnel. Jorvac nodded. "This leads directly to Kel's chamber. Few know about it. It's meant for emergencies." Sarah didn't respond. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Would Kel listen? Could she make him understand the gravity of what was happening? Or would they simply be walking into a trap? She pushed the doubts aside, focusing on each step forward. As they neared the end of the passage, the glow from the walls intensified, casting strange shadows that danced across their faces. Suddenly, Jorvac held up a hand, signaling them to stop. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, the heart of Kel's stronghold. In the center stood Warlord Kel himself, his towering form illuminated by the pulsating light of the spires surrounding him. He was surrounded by several elite warriors, their weapons drawn and ready. "We need to create a distraction," Jorvac murmured. "I'll draw their attention. You two go for Kel." Before either Sarah or Jason could protest, Jorvac stepped out of the shadows, calling out loudly in his native tongue. The warriors turned toward him instantly, their movements swift and menacing. Kel's head snapped up, his jagged scars standing out starkly against his armored skin. For a moment, he looked surprised to see Jorvac, but then his expression hardened. "Traitor!" Kel snarled, raising one clawed hand. His warriors surged forward, engaging Jorvac in a fierce struggle. Seizing the opportunity, Sarah and Jason slipped into the chamber unnoticed. They moved quickly, weaving between the glowing spires as Kel barked orders at his soldiers. The warlord seemed distracted, his focus entirely on subduing Jorvac. But Sarah knew they wouldn't have much time. "Over there," she whispered, pointing to a control panel embedded in the base of one of the spires. It was covered in intricate symbols, but Sarah recognized some of them from her studies. "That must control the bioweapons. If we can disable it." Jason nodded, positioning himself nearby to keep watch. As Sarah worked frantically to decipher the controls, the sounds of battle grew louder. Jorvac fought valiantly, but he was outnumbered. Blood trickled down his side, staining his armor, yet he refused to back down. Finally, Sarah found the sequence she needed. Her fingers hovered over the panel, hesitating for just a moment. Disabling the system might buy them time, but it wouldn't stop Kel entirely. Before she could act, a deafening roar shook the chamber. Everyone froze. turning toward the source of the noise. A massive crack split the ground beneath Kel's feet, glowing orange like molten rock. Flames erupted from the fissure, swirling upward in unnatural patterns. The warlord stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, and perhaps fear. The whispers Sarah had heard earlier returned, louder now, forming words that even she could understand. Asterisk. The innocent cry for justice. Asterisk. Kale shouted something in his language, his voice trembling. His warriors faltered, unsure of what to do. Some dropped their weapons, backing away from the flames. Others tried to shield themselves, but the fire seemed alive, reaching out with tendrils of light. Sarah realized what was happening. The eternal flame wasn't just a legend, it was real. And it had come for Kale. Taking advantage of the chaos, Sarah pressed the final symbol on the panel. The spires dimmed, their glow fading as the bioweapons powered down. Jason grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. We need to go, now. They ran, retracing their steps through the passage as the stronghold collapsed behind them. When they emerged into the open air, the sight took their breath away. Across the horizon, the unnatural fires burned brighter than ever, consuming everything tainted by violence and hatred. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for a new beginning. The flames consumed Cal's stronghold, twisting and writhing like living things. The warlord stood frozen, his once commanding presence reduced to that of a frightened creature. He tried to shout orders, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the fire and the haunting whispers that filled the air. The eternal flame had come for him, and there was nowhere left to run. Jorvac limped away from the chaos, battered but alive. His body ached from the fight, and blood seeped through the cracks in his armor, but he felt a strange sense of peace as he stumbled toward Sarah and Jason, who were waiting near the edge of the forest. He couldn't help but think of the prophecy he'd always doubted. Perhaps some laws were too sacred to break, even for someone as powerful as Kale. Sarah rushed to Jorvac's side, helping him stay upright. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with both relief and fear. "I'll live," Jorvac replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. He looked back at the inferno consuming the stronghold, his expression unreadable. "This changes everything." Jason, clutching his wounded shoulder, nodded grimly. "For them, and for us." The three of them didn't speak much as they made their way back to the human settlement. The unnatural fires continued to spread across the landscape, devouring anything tainted by violence or hatred. Trees blackened and crumbled, rivers boiled, and even the glowing spires collapsed into ash. Yet amid the destruction, something else emerged, a quiet stillness, as if the planet itself was healing. When they arrived at the colony, the survivors greeted them with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Captain Alan Carter immediately called another meeting, this time under the light of the setting sun. Faces were drawn, but there was a glimmer of determination in their eyes. They had endured the worst, and somehow they were still standing. "We saw the fires," Laura Hayes said, breaking the silence. "Is it over?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "Kale is gone. So are his weapons. But," she glanced at Jorvac, unsure how much to say. "The eternal flame isn't just about punishment," Jorvac interjected. "It's about balance. This land has been scared by fear and cruelty for too long. What we saw today, it's the planet's way of resetting." The settlers exchanged uneasy looks. Some seemed relieved. Others remained skeptical. Matthew Dawson sat quietly in the back, his face unreadable. Since Emily's death, he had become a shadow of himself, rarely speaking unless necessary. But now, as he listened to Jorvac's words, a flicker of emotion passed over his features, something between anger and acceptance. "What happens next?" Carter asked finally. "Do we stay, or do we leave while we still can?" Jorvac stepped forward, his posture straightening despite his injuries. "You can stay, if you're willing to change. My people, what's left of us, will need your help to rebuild. Not as rulers or conquerors, but as equals. Sarah nodded in agreement. This planet gave us a second chance. We can't waste it. Over the following days, the humans and the remaining Voktars began working together. Jorvac took on a leadership role among his kind, advocating for peace and cooperation. Many of the younger Voktars, disillusioned by Kel's tyranny, welcomed the change. Slowly, trust began to form where there had once been only fear. Laura Hayes tended to the injured, treating both humans and Voktars alike. Her calm presence helped bridge the gap between the two species, proving that compassion could transcend differences. Even Matthew found solace in small acts of kindness, helping to clear debris and rebuild shelters. Though the pain of losing Emily would never fully fade, he started to find purpose in creating a better future for those who remained. As the fires subsided and the land began to heal, Sarah often found herself reflecting on how far they had come. One act of violence had nearly destroyed them all, but in its aftermath, they had discovered something unexpected: unity. It wouldn't be easy, and the scars would take generations to heal, but for the first time, there was hope. Standing beside Jorvac one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. "We did it," she said softly. Jorvac turned to her, his large eyes gleaming faintly in the fading light. "No," he corrected gently. "We're just beginning." Weeks passed, and the planet began to heal in ways no one had anticipated. The unnatural fires that had raged across the land left behind fertile soil, rich with nutrients. Strange plants sprouted overnight, their leaves shimmering faintly under the purple sky. Streams flowed again, clear and cool, bringing life back to areas that had been barren for centuries. It was as if the eternal flame had not only punished but also cleansed, giving both species a chance to start anew. The humans and Voktars worked tirelessly to rebuild their shared home. Under Jorvac's guidance, the remaining Voktars abandoned their old ways of ruling through fear and embraced cooperation. They dismantled weapons and repurposed technology to aid in construction and agriculture. For the first time, they saw themselves not as masters of the planet, but as stewards alongside the humans. Sarah spent her days teaching settlers and Voktars how to communicate more effectively. Her translator device became less necessary as both groups learned each other's languages and customs. She found joy in small victories, like when a young Voktar's child mimicked a human laugh, or when an elderly settler offered a nod of gratitude to a Voktar's worker. These moments reminded her that even the smallest gestures could bridge vast divides. Jason Miller, though still recovering from his injury, took charge of organizing patrols to ensure safety. He paired humans with Voktars, fostering trust through teamwork. At first, the pairs were awkward and cautious, but over time, bonds formed. One evening, while sitting around a campfire, Jason listened as a Voktar's warrior named Trell recounted stories of his youth. Though much was lost in translation, the laughter and camaraderie needed no words. Matthew Dawson remained quieter than most, but his actions spoke volumes. He planted a garden near Emily's grave, filling it with colorful alien flowers he had never seen before. Each bloom represented a memory, a promise to honor her life by nurturing growth rather than destruction. When Laura Hayes joined him one afternoon, offering advice on cultivating the new plants, he managed a faint smile. "She would have loved this place," he said softly. Captain Alan Carter focused on restructuring the colony's leadership. Meetings now included representatives from both species, ensuring decisions were made collaboratively. Disagreements arose often, but they were resolved through dialogue rather than force, a stark contrast to Kel's reign. Even those who had once doubted coexistence began to see its potential. One evening, as the settlement gathered for a communal meal, Jorvac stood up to speak. His voice carried across the open space, steady and sincere. "This is not just a new beginning for our peoples, it is a rebirth for this world. The eternal flame showed us what happens when we lose balance, but it also gave us a gift, a chance to build something stronger together." His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Sarah watched as humans and Voktars exchanged nods and smiles, their unity fragile yet undeniable. For all the pain and loss they had endured, there was a shared determination to protect what they had fought so hard to create. Later that night, Sarah walked alone along the edge of the forest, staring up at the stars. Jorvac joined her, his silhouette blending with the shadows. "Do you think we can keep it?" she asked after a long silence. "This piece." Jorvac considered the question before answering. "It won't be easy. There will always be those who cling to the old ways. But as long as we remember why we changed, and what we stand to lose, we'll find a way." Sarah nodded, feeling a quiet resolve settle within her. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, she believed they truly had a future worth fighting for. As the two of them stood side by side, the distant hum of the planet seemed almost melodic, a reminder that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. Months turned into a year, and the colony thrived in ways no one could have imagined. The humans and Voktars had transformed the scared landscape into a vibrant tapestry of life. Fields of golden crops swayed gently in the breeze, their alien grains providing sustenance for both species. Strange fruits hung from bioluminescent trees, casting soft light over pathways where humans and Voktars walked side by side. It was a fragile harmony, but it held strong against the challenges that arose. Matthew Dawson spent most of his days tending to the garden near Emily's grave. The flowers he had planted now stretched tall, their petals shimmering with hues of blue and silver under the purple sky. Children, both human and Voktars, often gathered there, drawn by the beauty of the blooms and the stories Matthew told about Emily. He spoke of her kindness, her laughter, and how she loved exploring new things. In sharing her memory, he found a way to keep her spirit alive, not just for himself, but for everyone who listened. Laura Hayes continued her work as a healer, treating injuries and illnesses with knowledge shared between the two species. She marveled at the Voktars' advanced understanding of biology and medicine, which complemented human techniques. Together, they developed treatments that saved lives on both sides. Late at night, she often sat with Jason Miller, discussing their hopes for the future. Though neither spoke of it directly, their bond deepened, forged through shared struggles and triumphs. Captain Alan Carter stepped back from leadership, allowing younger voices to guide the settlement. His decision was met with gratitude, as many saw it as a sign of trust in the next generation. Meetings were now led by Sarah Bennett and Jorvac, who worked seamlessly together despite their differences. Their partnership became a symbol of what cooperation could achieve, a reminder that unity didn't mean losing individuality but celebrating it. One evening, the entire community gathered for a celebration. Torches lined the pathways, casting warm light over tables laden with food. Music filled the air. Strange melodies played on instruments crafted by both humans and Voktars. Laughter echoed through the night as people danced, ate, and shared stories. For a few hours, the weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by joy and hope. As the festivities wound down, Sarah stood apart from the crowd, watching the scene unfold. Jorvac joined her, his large eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. "It's beautiful," she said softly, gesturing to the gathering. "Yes," Jorvac replied, "but it's also fragile. We must guard it carefully." Sarah nodded, knowing he was right. The scars of the past would always linger, the loss of Emily, the destruction wrought by Kale, the fear that had once divided them. Yet those scars were also reminders of how far they had come. "I think we can do it," she said after a moment. "We've already proven we can change." Jorvac tilted his head, studying her thoughtfully. "You humans are resilient. That's why you survived here. But remember, resilience isn't just about enduring. It's about growing stronger." Sarah smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As she looked around at the faces of her friends, human and Voktars alike, She realized that this wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of redemption, of finding light in the darkest moments and building something greater than anyone could have dreamed. The planet itself seemed to echo this sentiment. The unnatural fires that had once brought destruction now left behind fertile soil and thriving ecosystems. Even the whispers that had haunted the settlers during the war had faded, replaced by a gentle hum that felt almost comforting. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Sarah reflected on everything they had endured. Emily's death had been a tragedy, but it had sparked a chain of events that brought justice and unity. The eternal flame had punished cruelty, but also offered renewal. And though the road ahead would be challenging, Sarah knew they were ready to face it together. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace.